You ever witness arrogance so monumental it almost deserves a standing ovation? That was me one Saturday afternoon, half submerged in my own pool, beer sweating in reach, basking in the silence that comes after a brutal week wearing the badge. The water was perfect. The world quiet. Then came a single awful sound. The screech of expensive sneakers on concrete, followed by a voice dripping with entitlement. "Hey, old man, you need to get out." Now, I opened one eye. A 17-year-old in designer gear stood at the edge of my pool, arms crossed, chin tilted like he owned the zip code. "This is HOA property," he said. "My dad runs this neighborhood, so unless you want problems, step out of the pool." I nearly laughed. The confidence of youth, mixed with inherited arrogance, a dangerous cocktail. If only this kid knew who he was talking to. Smash that subscribe if you love seeing entitled people finally get what they deserve. You'll want to stick around, because this whole stunt turns into one of the most satisfying doses of poetic justice I've ever witnessed. 6 months earlier, I'd moved into Willowbrook Estates, a suburban dream straight out of a real estate brochure. Identical lawns, spotless driveways, and an HOA rulebook massive enough to qualify as literature. I'd just been elected sheriff for the county, which required me to relocate here. Quiet neighborhood, strong property values, safety index through the roof. What could go wrong? Apparently, everything if the wrong man holds a clipboard. His name was Richard Hale, HOA President. He arrived on my third day wearing a smile, polished like a trophy, and carrying a basket of muffins so symmetrical they looked produced by a 3D printer. "Welcome to Willowbrook Estates, neighbor. Just wanted to make sure you got our community guidelines. 47 pages. Primera. Then, in the same breath, he slipped the knife of dominance. "By the way, your moving truck blocked the Henderson driveway for almost 20 minutes yesterday. We take parking very seriously here. Wouldn't want you to start off with a violation." Smooth, friendly on the surface, authoritative underneath. Years in law enforcement had taught me to spot controlled junkies instantly. Richard wore his authority like a designer was expensive, shiny, and meant to flaunt. I smiled, thanked him, and shut the door. No need to mention my profession. When strangers learn you're the sheriff, they either clam up or perform. I wanted to observe this place as an ordinary resident first. That silence, as it turned out, would be both my smartest move and my biggest mistake. A week later, I met Richard's pride and joy, Tyler Hale, 17, entitled and sponsored by his father's ego. He rolled up in a brand new BMW, his parents gifted for a C+ GPA, bass shaking the neighborhood like a minor earthquake. At 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, his music rattled my windows. I walked over, calm. "Hey, mind turning it down? People are sleeping." He looked me up and down like I was gum on his Air Force Ones. "Relax, old man. My dad's the HOA president. We can do whatever we want." That sentence, "we can do whatever we want," would become the Hale family anthem. For 3 years, Richard Hale had turned the Homeowners Association into his personal fief. He stacked the board with people who owed him favors or feared his wrath. Every meeting was theater, Richard deciding who was in compliance based purely on favoritism. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly lady, 3 doors down, got fined $200 for her Gardenham's classic ceramic ones that had stood untouched for 15 years, according to rigor, tabulated visual harmony standards. When she protested, he scheduled daily inspections until she paid. The Johnson's young couple with a newborn were cited because their 10-year-old Honda Civic sat 3 inches over a painted line in their driveway. Fine, $500. Richard's tyranny wasn't random. It was engineered fear. His philosophy: control breeds order, and order makes property values rise. And his son adopted the lesson. Tyler parked across 2 spaces, blasted music until dawn, borrowed tools without asking, and left them broken. Confront him, and Richard stormed in declaring harassment. I watched this happen, documenting quietly. Neighbors lowered their voices when Richard passed. They obeyed to stay off his radar. The community had slipped from neighborhood into dictatorship. My plan was simple. Stay neutral. Handle my county position long hours, constant calls and ignore suburban drama. But as the months passed, it became impossible. Richard patrolled the streets on weekends, with a clipboard. Inspections disguised as walks. Sometimes Tyler followed, recording violations for fun. Soon letters started showing up at my door. Grass height exceeds community standards. Commercial vehicle prohibited. He was testing me. I complied with valid requests. The rest I ignored, and every time I stayed impossibly calm. Atet dat. By month 6, I'd seen enough. Richard wasn't safeguarding property values. He was leveraging power for control. This went beyond nuisance. I began collecting evidence. Letters, photos, time-stamped footage, written statements. Neighbors slipped to me anonymously. I wasn't just surviving the HOA anymore. I was building a case. Now back to that perfect Saturday. I was floating, beer in hand, finally relaxed when Tyler stomped in like he owned the oxygen. Color drained from his face, then returned twice as red. You're lying. My dad will destroy you. He whipped out his phone, trembling with outrage. You're finished. You don't know who you're messing with. I'll wait, I said, reclining again. Bring him. Hey, old man, you need to get out. This is HOA property. My dad says so. I told him, calm but firm. Kid, 'tis is my pool. My house, my property. A smirked. No, it's not. The community map shows this side as common rec space. I laughed, an honest belly laugh that echoed across the water. Son, whatever fake map your father flashed, I've got the deed from the county that says otherwise. You're trespassing. 5 minutes later, storm clouds on legs resheared, hail burst through my side gate. Sunglasses, polo shirt, tucked too tight, phone already recording. What in the world is going on? Bark. Dos. Bark. Your son just trespassed on my property and ordered me to leave my own pool, pre-met side evenly. Now I'm asking you both to leave. Richard scrolled through something on his screen. According to the HOA maps, this area is designated community space. You're trespassing. I stared at him. You know that's not true. Deed, survey, permits all clear ownership. I don't care what forgeries you've printed, he snapped. This is association land. As president, I'm informing you you're in violation of multiple bylaws. Unauthorized use of community property, harassment, failure to comply. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Mrs. Pedersen wrung her hands on the porch. I'm talking substantial fines, Richard continued, voice swelling for his audience. Thousands of dollars. And Monday, we'll hold an emergency HOA session to discuss your removal from the community. Then the cherry on top, he turned and shouted, Tyler, record it! We'll show everyone what happens when someone thinks they're above the rules. They left laughing, threats echoing behind them. I looked at my waterproof camera light, blinking red. Every second was documented. Consequences, I whispered. Yeah, Richard, let's talk about those. That night, Mrs. Pedersen knocked on my door, casserole trembling in her hands. I saw what happened. She said softly, May I come in? She poured out 3 years of fear in 2 hours. Ridiculous fines, humiliation, skipped medications because of penalties. Her stories matched others I'd heard in whispers. Tom Johnson admitted his car was keyed after he questioned a ticket. We paid a fine, and the harassment magically stopped, he said. The Chuns told me Tyler broke their mower. Then they got fined for having uncut grass. The Rodriguez's teenage daughter rejected Tyler at school. Days later, their house was egged. When they confronted Richard, he threatened to sue for slander. Pattern confirmed. Intimidation, manipulation, silence. I listened. I documented. And I promised them what everyone had stopped believing in justice. Monday trash, scattered on my lawn. Caught on camera. Tyler's BMW. Tuesday engine revs, outside every hour. Wednesday 2, slashed, truck tires. Thursday anonymous letter, demanding I apologize publicly or face maximum fines. Each entry went into my file, but I needed one last act to nail them completely. By Friday night, I found it. Returning home near midnight, I discovered chaos. Beer bottles littered the pool, patio furniture overturned, grill submerged. Someone had thrown up in the flower beds. Security footage told the story. Tyler's party 20 teenagers, trespassing, drinking, vandalizing under Richard's boys will be boys' blessing. I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, clarity. These people needed someone they couldn't bully. Saturday morning I filed official reports with my own office. Trespass, vandalism, harassment. Uploaded every clip, every letter. Sent copies to the county attorney and the state HOA oversight board. By Sunday night, I had warrants, witness statements, and the kind of airtight dossier prosecutors dream about. And guess who had just called an emergency HOA meeting for Monday? Richard Hale had scheduled his own trial. Community Center. Monday, 7 p.m. The parking lot overflowed, half the neighborhood hungry for spectacle, the other half terrified. I arrived in jeans and a simple shirt. Nothing flashy. Leather folder tucked under my arm. Inside, evidence. Richard stood at the front in a tailored blazer. Microphone clipped. Tyler in the front row recording with a smug grin. "Good. You decided to show up," Richard boomed. "Let's begin." He launched into a monologue straight from a courtroom drama. "Good. You decided to show up," Richard boomed. "Let's begin." He launched into a monologue straight from a courtroom drama. "We have rules for a reason to. Protect property values and community safety. And this man chooses to ignore them." Projector clicked. Up flashed photos of my house, my truck, my pool, screenshots of me clipped from Tyler's phone into a narrative that said I was dangerous. "He's aggressive, disrespectful, occupying common property, threatening residents," Richard continued, hand on his son's shoulder. "We can't have behavior like this." Murmurs filled the room. People shifted uncomfortably. Then he dropped the bomb. Fines totaling $15,000, removal of commercial vehicle, and, if unresolved in 30 days, legal action to force sale of his property. He sat back smugly. "Does the accused have anything to say in his defense?" I stood. "Actually, yes." He gestured theatrically. "Make it quick." I placed the deed under the projector. "Here's my property title, recorded with the county, showing all 742 Oak Street including. The pool is private land. Certified copies for anyone who wishes to verify." The room murmured louder. "Forgery." Richard spat. "Official seal says otherwise," I said. "Next slide. County map, survey papers, zoning confirmation letter, all legitimate." I faced Richard. "You've ruled this neighborhood through fear for 3 years. But fear falls apart when truth walks in." I reached into my pocket and lifted my badge. The county seal caught the fluorescent light. "Name's Michael Reeves," I said, "sheriff of this county, and Richard Hale and your son have a serious problem." Gasps. Chairs scraped. Richard's mouth opened, then shut. "Entrapment requires inducement. I didn't make you fabricate maps or help your son throw a party in my pool. You did that yourself." A staggered. I turned the projector again. Financial records. HOA assessments funneled into Richard's personal account under administrative fees. The board members stared. "Care to explain why every special assessment coincides with deposits to your bank?" Silence. That's impossible." "You said you worked in public service?" "I do," I said. "Law enforcement is public service." I laid down the folder, thicker one. "For 6 months, I've documented everything you've done. Fraudulent fines, falsified maps, misuse of HOA funds, threats, vandalism, all legal warrants obtained. You can't. This is entrapment." "That's embezzlement, Richard. That's fraud." The audience erupted, shocked voices overlapping. I looked to the board. "Any of you aware of these transfers?" Heads shook uniformly. "Effective immediately," I said. "Your HOA bank records are under state audit. Tyler's facing criminal charges. Trespass, vandalism, underage drinking, and assault after shoving a law enforcement officer. That last point hit. The single shove earlier, witnessed by over 100 residents. I pulled my cuffs calmly. "Tyler Hale, you're under arrest." "What?" "No," he yelled, backing up. "I barely touched you." "Any unwanted contact with an officer is assault," I said. "Congratulations. You just advanced your charges." He bolted for the exit, but my deputy's waiting 2 blocks away, just in case. Richard slumped, the image of perfect suburban dominance, dissolving under fluorescent lights. Mrs. Patterson stood, her voice strong. 3 years of threats end tonight. Applause started hesitantly, then swelled until the walls trembled. Board member Gerald Hutchkins stood, voice shaking. "I call for an immediate vote to remove Richard Hale as HOA President." Every hand rose. "Unanimous. Motion passes," Gerald said, exhaling decades of fear. "Effective immediately." Within seconds, Tyler was cuffed and read his rights, while the crowd shouted approval. "Richard, you can't take my son. You'll regret this. Do you know who I am?" "Yes," I said. "You're the HOA president under arrest for fraud." The word fraud echoed like thunder. Weeks later, courtrooms took over the story. Tyler Hale, community service, probation, restitution $12,000, mandatory counseling. Richard Hale, indicted on counts of fraud, embezzlement, falsification of community documents, harassment. The state's HOA Regulatory Board uncovered $40,000 in misused funds, phantom vendors, and consulting fees wired to accounts in his name. Civil suits followed from nearly every homeowner, many represented by David Rodriguez, a civil rights attorney who happened to live here and had endured Richard's tyranny firsthand. Pro bono representation turned the case into a statewide headline. HOA president and son brought down by sheriff neighbor. Within 6 weeks, the Hale family house had a discreet for sale, no fanfare. No goodbye. Tyler's first day of community service looked poetic. Cleaning the same pool deck he'd once He paused during lunch and approached me. "Sheriff Reeves, I wanted to say I'm sorry for all of it. Sorry you got caught or sorry you did it." Primera, hashti, he thought. Both, but more the second one now. I didn't realize the damage we were doing. "Then learn from it," I said. "Consequences exist to teach." He nodded, returned to work quietly. Progress. Meanwhile, Willowbrook Estates transformed. A new board elected transparently. Ridiculous rules scrapped. Garden gnomes reinstated like tiny victorious soldiers. Parking laws rewritten with sanity. Fines became last resorts instead of weapons. At the first community pool day, kids laughed where fear used to live. Mrs. Patterson brought her famous potato salad. The Johnson babies splashed in the shallow end. Marcus Webb flipped burgers on my restored grill. Tom Johnson raised a beer. "Sheriff, part of me wishes you'd told us who you were sooner." "Maybe," I said. "But if I had, Richard would have played saint in public and devil in private." This way, every mask slipped on its own. Sun dipped low, water shimmering gold, laughter echoing. That's when I realized something. You don't need a badge to fight bullies. My badge just made the paperwork easier. Bullies survive on silence. Whether it's an HOA tyrant, a boss, or a petty dictator, their strength exists only as long as people stay afraid. The moment good people stand up to Dokima, speak, unite, power folds like cheap paper. Richard Hale and his son learned that fear isn't authority and intimidation isn't respect. Real strength is standing for others, even when it shakes your own comfort. That's justice. And sometimes, justice really does take a swim. Fade out. Sound of calm water. Neighborhood laughter. Friday, 6:15 p.m. Tiller Hale's BMW arriving. Note the time stamp. The screen showed teenagers flooding my yard, diving into the pool, smashing bottles, pushing the grill. The volume of gasps could have lifted the roof. "This," I said calmly, "is trespass, vandalism, underage drinking. The silence afterward was thunderous. Tyler stopped filming. I turned to the crowd. And it's not isolated. Munda trash dump. When's all documented. Neighbor after neighbor stood to speak. Mrs. Patterson, voice shaking but resolute. He'll find me for my gnomes. Tom Johnson. Measured my driveway with a ruler. Marcus Webb. He'll find me for the fence his son vandalized. Every confession added weight until the room crackled with outrage. I faced, Richard, you've ruled this neighborhood through fear for 3 years. But fear falls apart when truth walks in. I reached into my pocket and lifted my badge. The county seal caught the fluorescent light. Name's Michael Reeves, I said, sheriff of this county. And Richard Hale and your son have a serious problem. Gasps. Chairs scraped. Richard's mouth opened, then shut.